In the small, sun-drenched town of Orangetown, Louisiana, the summer of 2015 unfolded with a languid, predictable rhythm. The Johnson family, a fixture in the community, lived in a modest two-story house on Maple Street, its white paint peeling slightly under the relentless heat. The days passed quietly, marked by the hum of cicadas and the occasional clatter of dishes in the kitchen. At the heart of the household was 21-year-old Michelle Johnson, a vibrant young woman with a sharp mind and boundless energy. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, and her hazel eyes sparkled with ambition as she navigated her final year at the local community college, studying business with dreams of one day running her own company. Michelle's life revolved around her relationship with 22-year-old James Taylor, a lanky young man whose infectious smile and easygoing charm had won her heart 2 years prior. James, with his tousled blonde hair and a passion for music, spent his days working at a record store downtown while nurturing a dream of opening his own music shop. He envisioned a space filled with vinyl records, guitars, and the kind of atmosphere that would draw musicians and dreamers alike. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Michelle often found herself swept up in his plans. Their evenings spent sketching out ideas for the store or listening to his carefully curated playlists. James was a frequent visitor to the Johnson household, his presence bringing a spark of liveliness to the otherwise predictable routine. He would strum his guitar on the porch or share stories of his latest finds at the record store, his laughter echoing through the house. The Johnson family, on the surface, appeared as a picture of stability. Michelle's mother, 44-year-old Lavana Johnson, was a tall, striking woman with a warm smile that masked a growing restlessness. Her once vibrant spirit had dulled over the years, worn down by the monotony of her daily life. Lavana worked part-time as a receptionist at a local dental office, her days filled with scheduling appointments and answering phones. Her evenings were spent tending to the house, preparing meals, or watching television in the living room, where the hum of the air conditioner provided a constant backdrop. Her husband, Roy Johnson, Michelle's stepfather, was a reserved man in his late 40s, his hands perpetually stained with grease from his job as an auto mechanic. Roy spent long hours at the garage, often returning home well after dusk, his exhaustion palpable. He was a man of few words, his interactions with the family limited to brief exchanges over dinner or mumbled goodnights before retreating to bed. The Johnson household operated with a quiet efficiency, each member moving through their roles with practiced ease. Michelle, ever the optimist, filled the home with her plans and laughter, her energy a stark contrast to the subdued atmosphere that had settled over her parents. Lavana, though outwardly composed, carried an unspoken weight. Her marriage to Roy, once grounded in mutual respect, had long since lost its spark. The passion that had defined their early years had faded, replaced by a comfortable but hollow routine. Lavana found herself drifting through her days, her thoughts increasingly preoccupied with a vague sense of longing. She missed the excitement of her youth, the days when life felt full of possibility. The monotony of her existence left her feeling unmoored, as though she were watching her life unfold from a distance. James's frequent visits became a bright spot in Lavana's otherwise predictable world. His youthful energy and genuine warmth stood in stark contrast to the quiet detachment that had settled over her marriage. When he arrived at the house, often with a record tucked under his arm or a story to share, Lavana found herself lingering in the room, listening to his conversations with Michelle. She admired his passion, the way he spoke about his dreams with unshakable conviction. His presence seemed to fill the house with a vitality that had been absent for years. Lavana began to notice small details about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the easy confidence in his movements, the way he seemed to bring out a lighter side of Michelle. These observations, innocent at first, took root in her mind, lingering long after he left. As the summer wore on, Lavana's attention toward James grew more pronounced. She found herself watching him from across the room, her gaze lingering on the curve of his jaw or the way his hands moved when he spoke. She began to seek out moments to engage with him, asking about his day or commenting on his latest musical obsession. These interactions were subtle, easily dismissed as maternal curiosity, but they carried an undercurrent of something unspoken. Lavana felt a flicker of guilt each time her thoughts strayed, but she dismissed it, convincing herself that her interest was harmless. She was, after all, a married woman, a mother, someone who had long since left behind the impulsiveness of youth. Yet the more time James spent in the house, the more Lavana felt a pull toward him, a quiet stirring that she could neither fully acknowledge nor ignore. Michelle, absorbed in her own world, remained oblivious to the shift in her mother's demeanor. She saw James's visits as a natural extension of their relationship, a sign of his commitment to their future together. She cherished the evenings they spent with her family, believing they strengthened the bond between them. Roy, too, noticed little beyond his own exhaustion. His days at the garage left him with little energy for anything beyond the basics, and he accepted James's presence in the house with a nod and a grunt, content to let the young man's energy fill the space. The Johnson household, for all its apparent harmony, was a fragile ecosystem, its balance maintained by unspoken agreements and carefully ignored truths. The summer days stretched on, each one blending into the next. Orangetown buzzed with its usual rhythms, children playing in the streets, neighbors chatting over fences, the distant hum of lawnmowers. The Johnson family moved through their routines, their lives intertwined yet quietly disconnected. Michelle dreamed of a future with James, her heart full of plans and possibilities. Roy buried himself in his work, his world narrowed to the engines he repaired. And Lavana, caught in the space between duty and desire, felt the first stirrings of a restlessness that threatened to unravel the fragile equilibrium of their lives. The heat of the Louisiana summer pressed down on the town, and within the walls of the Johnson home, a subtle tension began to take root, unnoticed but undeniable. As the summer deepened in Orangetown, the air grew thicker, heavy with humidity that clung to the skin. The Johnson household continued its quiet rhythm, but beneath the surface a subtle shift had taken hold. Lavana Johnson, increasingly drawn to James Taylor, found her thoughts consumed by the young man who brought a flicker of excitement to her otherwise monotonous days. His visits, once a simple extension of his relationship with Michelle, had become a focal point for Lavana, a distraction from the emptiness that had settled into her marriage. She began to notice qualities in James that stirred memories of her younger self. His unguarded laughter, his effortless charm, the way he carried himself with a confidence unburdened by the weight of years. These observations, which had begun as fleeting thoughts, grew into a quiet obsession, each interaction with him leaving her both exhilarated and unsettled. Lavana's initial gestures toward James were cautious, almost imperceptible. She offered compliments on his taste in music, her tone warm but measured, as though testing the boundaries of their exchanges. She lingered in the living room when he visited, her presence unobtrusive yet deliberate, her eyes tracing the lines of his movements. James, caught up in the ease of his connection with the Johnson family, interpreted her attention as kindness, a maternal interest in his life. He responded with his usual openness, sharing stories of his day or offering to help with small tasks around the house. Unaware chair, his actions driven by a desire to be useful. Lavana seized these moments, finding excuses to brush past him in the narrow hallway, or to stand closer than necessary when handing him a glass of iced tea. Each encounter, however brief, sent a jolt through her, a reminder of a vitality she had long forgotten. As the weeks passed, Lavana's fixation intensified, her thoughts drifting to James even when he was absent. She began to orchestrate opportunities to cross paths with him outside the house, her actions cloaked in the guise of coincidence. She took longer routes to the grocery store, passing by the record store where he worked, her heart quickening at the sight of him through the window. On one occasion, she stopped in, claiming to need a gift for a friend, and spent 20 minutes browsing while stealing glances at him. James, flattered by her interest, engaged her with his usual warmth, unaware of the undercurrent in her lingering smiles. These encounters, though fleeting, fueled Lavana's growing preoccupation, each one a spark that fed the fire within her. The shift in Lavana's behavior was subtle enough to go unnoticed by Roy, whose days were consumed by the demands of the garage. He returned home each evening weary, his mind occupied by carburetors and oil changes, oblivious to the changes in his wife's demeanor. Michelle, however, began to sense a distance in James. His calls grew less frequent, his responses to her texts brief and distracted. Their conversations, once filled with plans for the future, now skirted around deeper topics, as though he were holding something back. Michelle, attuned to his moods, attributed his behavior to stress from work or the pressure of his ambitions, dismissing her unease as overthinking. Yet the warmth that had defined their relationship felt tempered, replaced by a vague reticence she could not quite place. Lavana and James's interactions, meanwhile, took on a new intensity. What began as chance encounters evolved into deliberate meetings, carefully concealed from the rest of the household. Lavana suggested they meet at a quiet diner on the edge of town, claiming she needed advice about a surprise for Michelle. James, eager to please, agreed, unaware of the pretext. Over coffee, Lavana leaned closer, her questions about his life veering into personal territory, her gaze unwavering. James, initially taken aback, found himself drawn to her confidence, her attentiveness a contrast to the familiarity of his relationship with Michelle. The line between friendliness and something more blurred, and though he felt a pang of unease, he did not pull away. Their connection deepened in stolen moments, each one fraught with risk and exhilaration. Lavana, driven by a need she could not articulate, pushed the boundaries further, her actions guided by a recklessness she had not known in years. James, caught in the pull of her intensity, reciprocated, his initial hesitation giving way to a dangerous curiosity. Their encounters grew physical, a clandestine affair marked by hurried embraces in secluded places, a parked car, a shadowed corner of the park, each moment a secret they guarded with fierce determination. Lavana reveled in the thrill, the sense of reclaiming a part of herself she thought lost. James, however, wrestled with a growing guilt, the weight of his betrayal pressing against his conscience. The affair cast a shadow over the Johnson household, though its presence remained unspoken. Michelle's intuition sharpened, her observations of James's behavior tinged with doubt. She noticed the way he avoided her gaze during family dinners, the way his laughter seemed forced. Lavana, too, bore the strain, her composure fraying as she navigated the dual life she had created. She moved through her routines with mechanical precision, her thoughts elsewhere, her heart racing at the thought of her next meeting with James. The house, once a place of quiet stability, now hummed with an undercurrent of unease, a fracture too subtle to name, but too real to ignore. As the summer pressed on, the secret Lavana and James shared grew heavier, its consequences looming unseen, threatening to unravel the fragile bonds that held their world together. The weight of James Taylor's actions pressed heavily on his conscience as the summer nights grew longer in Orangetown. His clandestine affair with Lavana Johnson had spiraled beyond his control, each stolen moment deepening his sense of betrayal toward Michelle. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the line he had crossed. Determined to reclaim his integrity, James resolved to end the relationship with Lavana, to sever the connection that had ensnared them both. He chose a secluded location for their final meeting, an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town, its weathered wooden walls sagging under years of neglect. The barn, surrounded by overgrown weeds and hidden from the main road, offered the privacy he needed to speak plainly, to make it clear that their affair could not continue. He sent Lavana a brief message, asking her to meet him there at dusk, his tone firm but neutral, betraying none of the turmoil within him. Lavana, receiving the message, felt a chill settle over her. She sensed the finality in James's words, the unspoken resolve that threatened to dismantle the fragile world she had built around their secret. The affair, though fraught with risk, had become her lifeline, a tether to the vitality she had rediscovered through him. The thought of losing it, of returning to the hollow routine of her life with Roy, filled her with a desperate panic. As she prepared to meet James, her mind raced, torn between resignation and a fierce need to hold on to what they had. She dressed carefully, her hands trembling as she pulled on a light jacket, her reflection in the mirror revealing a woman caught between defiance and fear. The drive to the barn was silent, the hum of her car's engine the only sound as she navigated the winding roads. Her thoughts a tangled knot of emotion. The barn loomed in the fading light as Lavana arrived, its shadowed interior swallowing the last rays of the sun. James was already there, standing near the entrance, his posture tense, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared secret palpable. James began to speak, his voice steady but strained, explaining his need to end their relationship, to repair the damage he had done to his bond with Michelle. Lavana listened, her heart pounding, each word a blow to the fragile hope she had clung to. Her emotions churned, anger, fear, desperation, until they coalesced into a single overwhelming impulse. She interrupted him, her voice rising, her words a frantic plea to reconsider, to see what they could still be to each other. James, resolute, shook his head, stepping back, his rejection final. The argument escalated, their voices echoing in the empty barn, the space amplifying their raw emotions. Lavana's desperation reached a breaking point, her rational mind overtaken by a surge of despair. Her eyes fell on a rusted metal rod lying amidst the debris on the barn's dirt floor, its weight evident even in the dim light. Without fully processing her actions, she seized it, her grip tight, her body moving as if detached from her will. James, caught off guard, had no time to react as she swung the rod with a force born of anguish. The metal connected with his temple, the impact sickeningly solid, and he crumpled to the ground motionless, a thin trickle of blood seeping from the wound. Lavana stood frozen, the rod slipping from her hands, her breath ragged as the reality of what she had done crashed over her. Panic seized her, her mind a chaotic whirl of fear and instinct. She knelt beside James, her hands shaking as she checked for a pulse, finding none. The sight of his lifeless body, the blood pooling beneath him, sent her into a frenzied state. Her thoughts, disjointed and frantic, latched onto a horrifying realization. She had recently learned of her own HIV diagnosis, a secret she had kept even from Roy. In a moment of irrational madness, driven by a twisted need to bind James to her, even in death, she used a shard of broken glass from the barn floor to cut her palm, pressing her bloodied hand against his open wound, as if marking him with her own fate. The act was fleeting, born of a mind unhinged by guilt and terror, but it sealed the horror of her actions. Convinced James was dead, Lavana's survival instincts took over. She dragged his body across the barn floor, her strength fueled by adrenaline, and out into the dense forest that bordered the property. The night was dark, the moon obscured by clouds, providing cover as she stumbled through the underbrush, her hands and clothes smeared with dirt and blood. She found a shallow depression in the earth, hidden beneath a tangle of roots, and began to dig with her hands in the metal rod, her movements frantic but methodical. The task was grueling, the soil heavy with summer rain, but she persisted, driven by the need to erase her crime. When the makeshift grave was deep enough, she rolled James's body into it, covering him with earth and leaves, her breath shallow as she worked to conceal the evidence. By the time Lavana returned to her car, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. She drove home in a daze, her mind numb, her body aching from the night's exertion. She cleaned herself meticulously, scrubbing the blood and dirt from her skin, disposing of her soiled clothes in a trash bag she later buried in the backyard. The Johnson household remained quiet. Roy already gone to the garage, Michelle still asleep. Lavana moved through the morning with mechanical precision, preparing breakfast, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm within her. Across town, Michelle woke to find no messages from James, an absence that sparked a flicker of unease. She called him, her calls unanswered, her texts met with silence. As the hours passed, her worry deepened, a gnawing sense that something was terribly wrong. She drove to his apartment, finding it empty, his car nowhere in sight. Word of James's disappearance spread quickly through Orangetown, whispers of concern rippling through the community. The town, so accustomed to its quiet routines, buzzed with speculation, unaware of the darkness that had unfolded in the shadows of the abandoned barn. The quiet streets of Orangetown buzzed with an unfamiliar urgency as the news of James Taylor's disappearance spread. The discovery of his car, abandoned on a desolate stretch of road near the town's edge, jolted the local police into action. The vehicle, a faded blue sedan, sat untouched, its keys still in the ignition, a half-empty water bottle on the passenger seat. The Orangetown Police Department, unaccustomed to cases beyond petty theft or minor disputes, mobilized quickly, their small force led by Detective Clara Hensley, a seasoned officer with a sharp eye for detail. The initial search yielded little. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, only the eerie stillness of the car parked under a sagging oak tree. The police cordoned off the area, their flashlights cutting through the early morning mist as they combed the surrounding brush for clues, their radios crackling with updates that offered no answers. Michelle Johnson, meanwhile, grappled with a growing dread. James's silence stretched into a second day, his absence a void that gnawed at her. She paced her bedroom, her phone clutched tightly, refreshing her messages in vain. Her thoughts turned to her mother, Lavana, whose behavior had grown increasingly erratic in recent weeks. Lavana's late-night outings, her distracted demeanor, and the way she avoided Michelle's gaze during meals had not gone unnoticed. A seed of suspicion took root, prompting Michelle to act on an impulse she could not ignore. Late that evening, while Lavana was in the shower, Michelle slipped into her mother's bedroom and unlocked her phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the messages. What she found shattered her. Texts between Lavana and James, their tone intimate, their words laced with a familiarity that betrayed a secret affair. One message mentioned a meeting at the old barn on the town's outskirts, a detail that sent a chill through Michelle's veins. Driven by a mix of betrayal and fear, Michelle drove to the abandoned barn the following morning. The location seared into her mind. The structure stood as she remembered it from childhood explorations, its wooden beams weathered and gray, its interior cloaked in shadow. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the dirt floor, her heart pounding as she scanned the space. Her eyes caught on a dark stain near the center of the barn, partially covered by scattered straw. Kneeling, she brushed the debris aside, revealing a patch of dried blood, its edges crusting into the earth. The sight confirmed her worst fears, and she stumbled back, her breath shallow. With shaking hands, she called the police, her voice steady despite the panic coursing through her. Within hours, Detective Hensley and her team arrived, their presence transforming the barn into a crime scene, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze as forensic technicians began their work. The investigation gained momentum as the evidence mounted. The blood in the barn was analyzed, its DNA a match for James Taylor, a finding that shifted the case from a missing person to a potential homicide. The police expanded their search, canvassing the surrounding area, their efforts fueled by a sense of urgency. An anonymous tip received late that evening directed them to a wooded area a mile from the barn. The forest, dense with pine and tangled undergrowth, was difficult to navigate, but the officers pressed on, their flashlights illuminating the uneven terrain. Near a cluster of gnarled roots, they uncovered a hastily dug grave, the soil disturbed and loose. The exhumation was methodical, each shovelful revealing more of James's body, his clothes caked with dirt, his skin pale and marred by trauma. The sight of his remains, coupled with the medical examiner's initial findings of blunt force trauma and traces of HIV infection, sent shockwaves through the police force and the tight-knit community. The discovery of James's body turned Orangetown's quiet unease into collective horror. News vans descended on the town, their cameras capturing the somber faces of residents as they grappled with the tragedy. The police, now under intense scrutiny, focused their investigation on the barn and its surroundings. A breakthrough came when they reviewed security footage from a nearby gas station, its grainy images capturing Lavana's car parked near the barn on the night of James's disappearance. The timestamp placed her at the scene, a damning piece of evidence that shifted the investigation's focus. Detectives interviewed neighbors, one of whom recalled seeing Lavana return home late that night, carrying a bucket and a rag, her clothes disheveled. Another neighbor noted her burning something in the backyard the following evening, the acrid smell lingering in the air. Michelle, devastated by the confirmation of James's death and her mother's betrayal, became a reluctant witness. She shared the text messages with Detective Hensley, her voice hollow as she recounted her discovery. The police searched the Johnson home, their presence a stark intrusion into the family's fragile routine. They found the buried trash bag in the backyard, its contents revealing blood-stained clothes and a pair of gloves, further tying Lavana to the crime. Roy, blindsided by the revelations, retreated into silence, his exhaustion giving way to a quiet devastation as he processed the collapse of his marriage. The community, once bound by familiarity, fractured under the weight of suspicion, their whispers turning to Lavana, the woman they had known as a neighbor, a mother, a friend. Lavana, sensing the tightening net, maintained a facade of composure, her interactions with the police polite but guarded. She attended James's memorial service, her face a mask of grief, though her eyes avoided Michelle's. The police, methodical in their approach, built a case grounded in physical evidence and circumstance. The blood in the barn, the security footage, the buried clothes, and the neighbors' accounts formed a compelling narrative, each piece pointing to Lavana as the primary suspect. As the investigation closed in, the town held its breath, the weight of the tragedy settling over Orangetown like a storm cloud, its shadow darkening the days that followed. The arrest of Lavana Johnson marked a turning point in Orangetown, the once quiet town now thrust into the spotlight of a sensational trial. The police, armed with a compelling array of evidence, took Lavana into custody at her home on a humid morning, their presence drawing curious stares from neighbors. Handcuffed and escorted to a waiting patrol car, Lavana maintained an eerie calm, her expression unreadable as she was driven away. The news spread rapidly, igniting a firestorm of media coverage that descended upon the small Louisiana town. Reporters from across the state set up camp outside the county courthouse, their cameras trained on the unassuming building where the trial would unfold, their broadcasts painting Orangetown as the backdrop to a tragedy that captivated the public's imagination. The trial began in the fall, the courtroom packed with spectators, journalists, and residents seeking answers to the questions that had haunted them since James Taylor's death. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Marcus Reed, a meticulous man with a reputation for unrelenting precision, presented a case built on irrefutable evidence. Reed methodically laid out the timeline, beginning with the text messages between Lavana and James, their intimate tone projected on a screen for the jury to see. The security footage from the gas station, showing Lavana's car near the barn on the night of the murder, played in stark silence, the grainy images etching themselves into the minds of those present. Forensic reports followed, detailing the blood found in the barn, confirmed as James's, and the buried clothes recovered from the Johnson backyard, their fibers stained with his DNA. The discovery of James's body, with medical evidence of blunt force trauma and HIV infection, underscored the brutality of the crime, each detail a thread in the prosecution's tightly woven narrative. Michelle Johnson took the stand as a key witness, her presence drawing a hush over the courtroom. Her testimony, delivered with a trembling voice, recounted the moment she uncovered her mother's affair through the incriminating texts, her words heavy with the pain of betrayal. She described her visit to the barn, the bloodstain that confirmed her fears, and the anguish of realizing her mother's involvement. Her account, raw and unfiltered, resonated with the jury, their faces reflecting the weight of her loss. The prosecution bolstered her testimony with expert witnesses, including the forensic pathologist who detailed the cause of James's death, a single forceful blow to the head, and the virologist who confirmed the HIV transmission, a deliberate act that shocked even the most seasoned observers. The evidence, layered and methodical, left little room for doubt, each piece reinforcing Lavana's culpability. Lavana's defense team, led by public defender Sarah Whitaker, faced an uphill battle. Whitaker, a determined attorney with a knack for humanizing her clients, argued that the killing was not premeditated, but rather an impulsive act born of emotional turmoil. She painted Lavana as a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, her affair with James a desperate grasp at reclaiming her youth. The defense leaned heavily on Lavana's psychological state, calling a psychiatrist to testify about her fragile mental health, suggesting that the murder resulted from a momentary lapse in judgment. Yet the defense's narrative struggled against the weight of the evidence, their arguments sounding hollow in the face of the prosecution's relentless case. Whitaker's attempts to shift blame to James, implying his complicity in the affair, led to the fatal encounter, drew sharp objections from Reed and skeptical glances from the jury. Lavana, seated at the defense table, remained stoic through much of the trial, her face a mask of detachment. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes fixed on the table before her. The pressure of the proceedings, however, began to erode her composure. During cross-examination, Reed's pointed questions about the night of the murder, her presence at the barn, The blood on her clothes, the deliberate act of infecting James, chipped away at her defenses. The courtroom grew tense as Lavana's responses, initially measured, became halting, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The turning point came on the fifth day, when Reed presented the medical evidence of the HIV transmission, his voice steady as he described the calculated nature of her actions. Lavana's facade crumbled, her shoulders slumping as she buried her face in her hands, a silent admission of guilt that rippled through the room. Under the weight of the evidence and the relentless questioning, Lavana requested a private meeting with her attorney. In a small, windowless room adjacent to the courtroom, she broke down, her sobs echoing as she confessed to Whitaker. She admitted to striking James with a metal rod in a fit of desperation, her fear of losing him overwhelming her reason. She recounted the moment she learned of her HIV diagnosis, a secret she had carried alone, and how, in a twisted act of possession, she infected James through his wound. A decision born of panic and obsession. She described dragging his body to the forest, her hands trembling as she buried him, her mind racing with the need to erase her crime. The confession, raw and unfiltered, was relayed to the prosecution, who agreed to present it to the court in exchange for a halt to further cross-examination. Lavana took the stand one final time, her voice barely above a whisper as she repeated her confession to the jury. She spoke of her regret, her words faltering as she described the moment she realized James was dead, the weight of her actions crashing over her. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the gravity of her admission settling over the spectators. The medical evidence, corroborated by her own words, eliminated any lingering doubts, sealing her fate. Michelle, watching from the gallery, wept quietly, her grief compounded by the finality of her mother's betrayal. Roy, present for the first time, sat motionless, his face etched with a sorrow that aged him beyond his years. The trial concluded with the prosecution's closing argument, Reed's voice resolute as he urged the jury to hold Lavana accountable for her calculated actions. The defense offered a subdued rebuttal, their case all but abandoned in the wake of the confession. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, their verdict unanimous. Lavana Johnson was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated assault, the charges reflecting the deliberate nature of her crimes. The courtroom emptied slowly, the weight of the trial lingering in the air, its impact reverberating through the Johnson family and the town that had once known Lavana as one of their own. The gavel fell in the Orangetown courthouse, its sharp sound sealing Lavana Johnson's fate. The judge, a stern figure with a voice tempered by years of presiding over human tragedies, sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The severity of the punishment reflected the calculated cruelty of her actions. The murder of James Taylor and the deliberate transmission of HIV, acts that had shattered a family and stunned a community. Lavana sat motionless as the sentence was read, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The courtroom, packed with onlookers, exhaled collectively, the weight of the verdict settling over the room like a heavy fog. Reporters scribbled furiously, their notes capturing the final chapter of a trial that had gripped Louisiana, while residents of Orangetown slipped out quietly, their faces etched with a mix of relief and sorrow. Michelle Johnson left the courthouse alone, the autumn air cool against her skin as she stepped into the fading daylight. The trial had stripped her of the life she had known, leaving her to navigate a world reshaped by loss and betrayal. James, the man she had loved and envisioned a future with, was gone, his absence a constant ache in her chest. Her mother, once a pillar of her life, was now a stranger, her actions a wound that cut deeper than Michelle could have imagined. The emptiness was overwhelming, a void that threatened to consume her in the days that followed. She returned to the Johnson home, its familiar walls now foreign, the silence deafening in the absence of the family it once held. Roy, her stepfather, remained a quiet presence, his own grief manifesting in long hours spent in the garage, his hands busy with tools as he sought refuge from the shame and devastation. Roy, broken by the collapse of his marriage and the public humiliation of the trial, struggled to find his footing. He attended the sentencing, his first appearance since Lavana's confession, his presence a silent gesture of support for Michelle. His face, lined with exhaustion, bore the weight of a man who had lost more than he could articulate. He moved through his days with mechanical precision, his interactions with Michelle limited but heartfelt, a shared understanding of their mutual loss binding them. He offered her small gestures, a cup of coffee left on the counter, a nod of encouragement as she left for work, his way of anchoring her amidst the storm. Yet his own pain remained unspoken, a burden he carried in solitude, his nights spent staring at the ceiling, grappling with the wreckage of his life. Michelle, though adrift, found glimmers of resilience within herself. The pain of James's death and her mother's betrayal was a constant companion, but she refused to let it define her. She began to channel her grief into purpose, her thoughts turning to the broader impact of the tragedy. The trial had exposed not only personal betrayals, but also the devastating consequences of untreated illness and unchecked desperation. Inspired by James's memory, his passion, his dreams, his warmth, Michelle resolved to create something meaningful from her loss. She founded the James Taylor Memorial Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting victims of violence and raising awareness about HIV prevention and treatment. The work was daunting, requiring her to navigate legal paperwork, fundraising, and outreach. But it gave her a sense of direction, a way to honor James while rebuilding her own life. The fund's early days were modest, operating out of a small office in downtown Orangetown. Michelle poured her energy into it, organizing community events, securing grants, and partnering with local health organizations. She spoke at schools and town halls, her voice steady as she shared James's story, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a call to action. The work was exhausting, often forcing her to confront her own pain, but it also brought moments of connection, with survivors who shared their stories, with volunteers who believed in her mission, with strangers whose lives were touched by her efforts. Each step forward, however small, was a reclamation of her agency, a refusal to be defined by the darkness of the past. Orangetown, too, began to heal, though the scars of the tragedy lingered. The media frenzy subsided, the news vans departing as quickly as they had arrived, leaving the town to reckon with its altered identity. Residents resumed their routines, the hum of daily life, children on bikes, neighbors chatting over fences, returning with cautious normalcy. Yet James's name remained a quiet presence, evoked in hushed conversations, in memorials held at the community center, in the flowers left at the edge of the forest where his body was found. The town grappled with its collective grief, some residents attending support groups, others finding solace in church, all seeking to move forward while carrying the weight of what had happened. Michelle's journey was not linear, marked by days of progress and others of profound sorrow. She visited James's grave often, a simple headstone in the town cemetery, its inscription a testament to his brief but vibrant life. She would sit there, the grass cool beneath her, and reflect on the dreams they had shared, the plans now left unfulfilled. These moments, though painful, grounded her, reminding her of the love that had once defined her days. She began therapy, a space to untangle the complex emotions of grief, anger, and guilt, each session a step toward understanding her own strength. Roy, too, found ways to cope, joining a woodworking class at the community center, his hands crafting furniture as a quiet act of creation amidst destruction. The James Taylor Memorial Fund grew steadily, its impact reaching beyond Orangetown. Michelle's efforts earned her recognition, not as a victim, but as a force for change, her story inspiring others to confront their own challenges. She found solace in the community she built, in the lives she touched, in the knowledge that James's legacy lived on through her work. Roy, though never fully recovering the man he had been, stood by her, his presence a quiet anchor. Together they navigated the slow, uneven path to healing, their bond forged in shared loss, but sustained by a fragile hope. Orangetown, forever changed, carried James's memory as a symbol of both tragedy and resilience, its people finding ways to live again, their hearts marked by the lessons of a summer that had tested them all.